Paul, I don't know if you want to open up the floor to questions.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Very, very interesting. Appreciate your time and effort to present to us all. There's been a host of queries have come in from the viewers, which I'll rattle through a few of them. The first one is for Martin. Do you know offhand if there's opportunity to sell the power back to the grid yet here in Ireland?
There is, Paul. Yeah, it just depends on whether it's domestic or non-domestic. It also can depend on the size of the array, but it's something that's only kind of started last year.
And hopefully that will then reduce the payback period.
It definitely will. Yeah, like there's varying rates of feed-in tariffs. It depends on who's your actual energy supplier. But as Tom was saying, like if possible, you match the array to the requirements of the building.
Yeah.
We clearly have somebody with an insurance hat in the audience, but he's posted a couple of questions, and I know who he is, but I won't publicize his name. Do you ever consult with the building's insurers before you proceed with the install?
Generally, we as Bauder wouldn't, but we would advise that our clients do. So it's not generally going to be Bauder that would be communicating with that insurer. But absolutely, you know, we would always advise that our clients talk to their insurer before they install anything, because, you know, they don't want to end up with a problematic conversation with their insurer the next time, you know, they're renewing.
Yeah. And as a follow-on, do any of your devices have any insurer approvals like UL or VDS?
From a solar perspective, no, because we don't work in America. I'm not an expert by any stretch on the UL guidance, but from a roofing perspective, we have FM approval. I don't know whether you want to jump in there, Nigel.
Yeah, just on the whole thing about insurance is the fact that one of the bits that Tom and I do a lot is consult with the insurance industry. So we speak to the underwriters, and so we have a good idea of what their thoughts are on fire. We do follow their guidance in terms of how far or how close PV panels should be to penetrations and the like. That's one of the things they're very keen on. Also that there should be breaks in the arrays. So again, we follow that. I saw that was a question in the mix there. Also the fact that we know that the insurers are basically certainly two key insurers have told us that if it's on a concrete deck, then they're far more relaxed. If it's a timber deck, it's a totally different ball game. So that sort of follows with that guidance. Well, if it's a concrete deck, well then it is or and not and in terms of the other requirements. I'm on the Factory Mutual Advisory Council for Europe, and in there they do give guidance on PV, and again a lot of that is to do with design and layout, which we do follow where we can. There's no denying there's pressure to try and maximize, as Tom said, every inch of the roof, but we try to push back and say, well, you should have these margins, and that's an important consideration for fire.
I was looking at your install map of British Isles there earlier, and obviously there's loads of your pins around the southeast of the UK, of England, far fewer up around Scotland and the west of Ireland. In terms of the difficulty of install with the higher winds in those areas, are there any particular or more onerous requirements you have to allow for?
Well, we will have higher winds. So we have a different annex for Ireland to England and Scotland, but we will design the system accordingly, depending on the wind load zone, depending on the terrain category, depending on the height of the building. So it's quite a complex calculation that we do for every single project, depending on where the site is. I should say that map of dots is not actually our installations. If we had a map of our installations, there would be thousands of them on there. The map of dots is actually local authorities that have announced a climate crisis, which I meant to mention at the beginning, but didn't quite get around to it. So, yeah.
There are either fewer local authorities in Scotland or they're less worried.
Yes, yeah. Global warming, you know, they might be looking forward to it.
How does the efficiency of your panels deteriorate over time? We talked about maybe a 5-year cleaning period in some part of Western Ireland, for example. Anything further to add to that?
So the silicon in solar panels degrades over time. So when we do things like well, you have a warranty to start with as part of the panel offer, and that usually guarantees 80% output at 25 years, so that it won't degrade more than 20% over that 25-year period. When we do return on investment calculations, for example, we always include a 0.5% degradation year on year, just as a sort of really conservative factor. When you start to look at glass panels, like the solar watt panels that I showed earlier, they have an even lower degradation factor because they're really hermetically sealed then. So but they will degrade naturally because of the silicon in them. And
on the environmental topic, is there yet any recycling offered for the panels, or is there any? We know, for example, turbine blades, it's a very contentious issue. So
all the panels we supply, the manufacturers are a member of an organisation called oh God, what is it called? It's just gone out of my head. There is an international organisation that all the manufacturers pay in. Every panel they supply, they pay into this PV cycle, it's called. And so panels can then get delivered to depots throughout the UK, and they'll be recycled at no cost. At the moment, there's very few panels being recycled, so they're not there yet. But slowly but surely, we were in Germany this week, and our French colleagues were telling me there's a big panel recycling plant just opened in the south of France. So it's moving that way.
Is that because the technology and the PV panels is a relatively new technology? They haven't yet outlived their usefulness, or
absolutely
there simply is no recycling available?
No, it's largely because they're most 2009 to 2011 we saw this solar boom. So prior to that, there were very, very few solar panels installed. Panels should last 25 years plus, so it's another 10 years before we're going to really start to see that level of recycling requirement ramping up.
In terms of the inverter location in a kind of a domestic scenario, have you any recommendations or preferences in terms of where the inverter should be? You mentioned in the commercial it should be ideally in the plant room, but in the domestic that might always be an available option.
So the only advice I would give for domestic applications is that most inverters, not all by any stretch, are fan cooled. They do pump out some heat, and so they should be in a ventilated space. They can go, in cupboards under the stairs and that kind of thing, but they will need ventilation. So we see them installed quite often in lofts spaces. They can be installed in loft spaces. I wouldn't install one in my loft, but they absolutely can, as long as it is ventilated and easily accessible for maintenance.
And also for the fire and rescue services as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Out of interest, what inverter brand do you actually use?
We use Solis and Solar Edge primarily, and then Fronius is a third manufacturer. Depends on the application. If there's shading or specific fire requirements, we tend to use Solar Edge. If it's just a standard commercial install with no shading, then we would generally use a Solis inverter.
Another question from our insurance viewer. What's the worst case consequences of a system being hacked?
Hacked as in, well,
you showed the
yeah, it's a very good question, and we have a lot of clients who spend. So this is a sort of about turn of answering the question, but we get a lot of clients who are very worried about not so much about the solar PV system itself being hacked, but the web portal, because it's open. We need access to the web. And often the firewalls can cause problems with that, actually causing a problem hacking into the building via that portal for the solar system. in all honesty, I don't know whether it would physically be possible to to do anything with the inverter to cause any problems if it was hacked. But it's not a question I've ever been asked before, so I can go away and find out, and if I can let you know, Paul, and you can pass it on to the person asking the question. It's a good question.
We're now living in the Internet of Things. I've got a number of devices downstairs which would have never had 3 or 4 years ago. And they're all connected to Wi-Fi, and I shudder to think who could be up to nefarious activities. There's a slight contradiction between what you said earlier in terms of ballasting the roof, fixing the PVC system physically to the roof, and the requirements of the RC 62, which recommends that you do fix it, whereas you're saying there are options not to fix it. How do you have a square circle?
Well, I mean, that's one of the points in the RC 62 that in general the solar industry doesn't agree with. RC 62, the new version of RC 62 does largely have that clause omitted. I mean, ballasting of solar arrays, if you mechanically fix a solar array, there's nothing wrong with mechanically fixing a solar array as long as the waterproofing is not affected. And actually, if you look at it as an industry, if you have a 1,000 solar panel system on a mechanically fixed mount, you've got 1,000 penetrations through that waterproofing. And so generally the advice for what are your risk areas? Well, okay, if those panels blew off the roof, that's a risk. But if you have a leak as a result of your solar array because you put 1,000 penetrations to the roof, that's potentially more, it's a different risk. But how do you weigh that up? Ballasted systems now are very, very good, and so actually, it's a much lower risk than potentially it was 5-7 years ago when that document was written.
In terms of the cable connections, are you aware of any industry requirements in terms of the standards which would apply?
Do you mean the connectors for the solar? Yeah. So I mean the main thing with connectors is that the same manufacturer, so the same connector. So we use MC4 connectors generally as an industry, and we would always advise that the same manufacturer of the MC4 is used. So it's you don't have different manufacturer connectors connecting together.
There's a very cheeky question here, which I don't expect you to answer, but I'll ask anyway out of pure devilment. There are a lot of solar panel suppliers in the market. Are there any advice as to where to start?
Yes, Bauder are very good. I heard. I mean, I would honestly, the advice I would give is that having somebody who's going to design the system up for you and supply it so you have no grey areas is the most important thing. Whether that be your roof, whether it be your PV system, joined up thinking is really important, and joined up warranties is really beneficial as well. So that would be my main piece of advice.
I think, Tom, what we do find is the fact that often the concerns about waterproofing are totally disregarded by somebody that's just involved in PV, and the concerns of PV are perhaps disregarded by the roofing. So the reason Tom's saying what he's saying is that you actually need to bring them together, otherwise you get compromise or out and out problems.
What's your experience of having to provide a fireman switch or a dead man switch? Is that something you get involved in downside of the inverter?
We don't tend to get involved in that part of the design. We are not electrical, we're roofers ultimately, but most of certainly in Ireland now, I think the guidance is that you have a fireman switch. Where you need a fireman switch, we will generally specify Solar Edge because they have a very nice, slick solution for that. But there are lots of options on the marketplace now for them.
Okay. Have you any do you ever recommend AFTD on electrical cabling?
No, I mean we don't get involved in that part of the design, so we wouldn't recommend it either way.
The questions are still coming in fast and thick, but I'm just conscious of the time. It's nearly 8:10. I propose just ask one or two more.
Sure.
And what we'll do is we'll get a printout of the remaining questions, pass them over to you, and if you find a time amongst your busy schedule, perhaps you can come back to us and we'll try and disseminate the answers. Have you ever been asked about the glare to aircraft near airports?
Yes, many times. And solar panels, if they had a lot of glare, they wouldn't be working very well, because you're trying to absorb as much of that light as possible. So if most of the panels all of the panels that we supply will have an anti-glare coating, but also if you look very closely at the face of a solar panel, it's almost like pocked. You know, it's like it's not a flat sheet. And so we've got loads of documentation around anti-glare and the fact that it's not really an issue. And
earlier, this will be the final question. You showed us the 3 typical conditions which Dublin Fire Brigade append to their fire safety applications here. Is there any comparable example from the UK? Building control there?
Not really, no. I mean, London Fire Brigade do have some guidance, but it's very different to the Irish, to the Dublin Fire Brigade. Generally, well, no, the answer is generally no. I mean, different local authorities might have different planning conditions, but ultimately, ultimately the answer is no.
If I misdirection here, I will ask one more question.
Sure.
Does the green roof improve the thermal performance of the roof?
No. Well, it will have benefits. So it will provide thermal shading. So it's good from a cooling perspective. Ultimately, the green roof is a wet system. You know, it'll be saturated at times when it's cold and wet outside. The green roof of itself will be cold and wet. So it wouldn't actually give you any true thermal value.
Very good. Gentlemen, thank you for your time. I do appreciate it. Certainly had a large number of viewers come in this evening, over 250. So thank you again, appreciate it, and we'll say good night.
Thank you, Paul. If I could say one thing, just at the end, we would love to engage with anybody who's interested in that conversation around the wording of the Dublin Fire Brigade and the deck or covering, and so we've got, you know, we would love to have more of a conversation around that. So if there is anybody on the call who is in a position to have those conversations, then please do get in touch.
Will do indeed.
Thank you all for your time.
Appreciate it.
And thank you for organising, Paul.
Nigel, our pleasure indeed. Thank you very much.